and on behalf of Natasha Williams and myself, welcome to the Balacula Theater Company's production of Marx in Soho. Thank you very much for coming. I didn't even yell at you guys. There's a lot of people. Gosh, you really kicked our butts tonight at the box office. That's good. That's a good thing. Because, we've had Arts and Humanities Month for a while now. Since about '93, and no one really paid attention to it, believe that or not. But this year, President Obama, I don't miss you over there. President Obama signed a proclamation to make October National Arts and Humanities Month. So that's a really great thing for people that love art and the humanities and all that stuff. So thank you for coming out. What we decided to do with this particular project was is take each performance, you probably know this, but for those who don't, each performance of this particular production and have it hosted by and benefiting a nonprofit organization that either deals with homelessness or poverty or the environment, social justice, things like this. And we have had a great response from the community supporting this idea where art actually makes a difference, you know, for everybody working together to for common causes and just supporting each other. So far tonight, as you know, is our final night, and this is a lovely way to send it out with all you guys. So far, we have seen a Pay What You Can performance that benefits Ann Feeney, who is a union singer who has been diagnosed with cancer and, you know, really needs some support with medication and stuff like that. That was really awesome. Then we had the UK and BTCT Student Socialist Union. The kids came out that night, and it was really awesome. We had Seed Leaf come out, helping people and teaching people about growing food and recycling food and stuff like this, and, you know, really cool stuff. And they were great. We had the Kentucky Environmental Foundation come here. We had Kentucky Jobs with Justice, the Kentucky Housing and Homeless Initiative, and tonight we have Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. So please. It's a long curtain speech. But tonight, to have a few words to speak to you guys just briefly about the organization and what's going on. We have Jerry Moody in the house. Jerry, there you are. And take it away.
Sure. Thank you all for coming out. Once again, my name is Jerry Moody, and I'll be speaking just briefly about Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. I am betting that there are members of the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth right here in the audience tonight. Raise your hand if you're a member of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is 7,500 citizens of Kentucky who formed together originally back 30 years ago over in Pikeville working against the Broad Form D. We won that Broad Form D battle. And, you know, we got to thinking, hey, maybe this democracy thing works. And so we started spreading across the state, registering people to vote, to protect our mountains in eastern Kentucky. But one of the things we noticed along the way, there were so many people that were not allowed to vote. That they were disenfranchised because they had committed some crime when they were younger. And so another project that we're working on with Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is to make sure and try to get the vote back for all of our former felons who have done their time. They paid their debts to society. There's only one other state in the Union that does not allow the former felons to work. So we are so behind the ball. These laws date back to Jim Crow laws. And so I'd like to invite you all to join Kentuckians for the Commonwealth if you're not members already. We will have membership forms here at the end of the evening. You can sign up for a minimal cost to help us do this work. Because we're not like a political party that is only here during the election time. We work 24/7, 365 days a week. Well, maybe we take our birthday off. But other than that, we work it constantly. We're proud sponsors of I Love Mountains Day that happens in Frankfurt every year. Every time that the legislature is in-house in Frankfurt, we are there with them, with citizens out with citizens, out lobbying just with citizens, and the politicians actually appreciate the fact that it's common citizens lobbying instead of lawyers. Let me thank you once again. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you.
Well, I do want to remind you, and I'll give you back to you. Thanks. I do want to remind you that information for these organizations, the information is also in your program, but it's also back here, sign-up sheets, websites, T-shirts, bumper stickers, things like that to support are back there. Let's see. Let's just get down to a little bit of mundane business here. Cell phones. If you have cell phones, please remind yourself to turn them off. And after the show, please remind yourself to turn them back on. You know, people are like, I don't know, I didn't get a call. Well, you forgot to turn it back on. That's what happened. So, okay, this is very, very important. In case of a fire, a smoldering blaze in the room, feel free to panic, scream, run, throw things. It's your personal choice. You can handle it however you want to, right? But as you do that, make your way out to the exit that way, which way you came. There's one right here. Usually we say wait till the actors leave. Because, you know, we're out of business if they go. But that he's quick. He'll probably already be gone. Afterwards, one of the cool things about this production that we've been doing is we're doing it in the old space where we used to act here, when we just had 2 lights and a glass of water. That's it. And we're doing it again. So this is sort of a nice homecoming that we've got going on here. But another one of the really cool things that we've been doing for this one is we're taking group photos at the end of the show and posting it everywhere so people can see who came and who came out to support. So please don't dash out before you get a picture taken with Marx, because it's really cool and everybody likes it. Let's see. I think that's pretty much it, ladies and gentlemen. At this point, do what?
Discussion afterwards?
Yes, please stay around for discussion afterwards if you'd like to. We have had some great ideas and sharing going on throughout this entire run, and you won't regret it. This is not a play where you can just sit and be like, oh, we're very serious about everything, and we don't need to talk. Don't anybody make a noise. If you agree, here. If you don't, that's fine too. I mean, nobody's throwing tomatoes tonight. Because tonight, we're taking our imaginations to a place in Soho, a cool little bar, cool little cafe where you can come, where all the hip people go for some coffee and some wine and some food. Wait a minute. Oh, it's not too hard to do. You're already here. So that's cool. Just call it Soho, okay? You never know who's going to be walking through that door to have a discussion with you about just what's going on with life, for heaven's sake. So, once again, don't be quiet. Make some noise. Enjoy yourself. It's the final evening, and we're so glad that you're here. Thank you for coming to the Ballagula Theater Company's production of Marx and Soho. Thank you very much.
How are you?
Oh, I'm just fine. Just fine. Couldn't be better than that.
You don't need anything else? You don't need
Oh, all right, that's fine. Oh, thank God, an audience. It's good of you to come. You weren't put off by those idiots who say that Marx is dead. Well, I am. And I'm not. That's dialectics for you. Now, you may wonder how I got here. Public transportation. I didn't expect to come back here, though. I wanted to return to Soho. That's where I lived in London. But a bureaucratic mix-up. Here I am. Soho in New York. Well, I always wanted to visit New York. Why have I returned? To clear my name. I've been reading your newspapers, and they all proclaim that my ideas are dead. Well, that's nothing new. These clowns have been saying this for over 100 years. But don't you wonder, why is it necessary to declare me dead again and again? Well, I had it up to here. I asked for the right to come back, just for a little while. But there are rules. I told you, it's a bureaucracy. It is permissible to read, even to watch, but not to travel. Well, I protested, of course, and I had some support. Socrates told them that an untraveled life was not worth living. Gandhi fasted. Mother Jones threatened to picket, and Mark Twain came to my defense in his own strange way, and Buddha chanted, hum. But the rest of them kept quiet. And my God, at this point, what do they have to lose? Yes, there too I have a reputation of being a troublemaker. And there too, protest works. Finally, they said, all right, you can go back, you can have an hour or two to speak your mind, but remember, no agitating. Well, they do believe in freedom of speech, but within limits. They're liberals. You can spread the word. Marx is back. Oh, just for a short while. But understand one thing. I am not a Marxist. I once said that to Piper. I thought he was going to croak. I should tell you about Piper. We were living in London. Jenny and I and the little ones, plus 2 dogs, 3 cats, and 2 birds. Barely living. A flat on Dean Street, near where they dumped the city sewage. We were in London because I had been expelled from the continent. Expelled from the Rhineland, yes, from my birthplace. I had done dangerous things, you know. I was the editor of a newspaper, the Rheinische Zeitung. Hardly revolutionary. But I suppose the most revolutionary act one can engage in is to tell the truth. Well, in the Rhineland, the police were arresting poor people for gathering firewood from the estates of the rich. Well, I wrote an article protesting that. Then they tried to censor our paper. I wrote another article declaring that there was no such thing as freedom of the press in Germany, and they decided to prove me right and shut us down. Only then did we become radical. Isn't that the way it is? Well, the last issue of the Zeitung had a huge headline in red ink. Revolt! Well, the authorities, that annoyed them. So I was ordered out of the Rhinelands. So I went to Paris. And where else do exiles go? Where else can you sit in a cafe all night and brag about how revolutionary you were in the old country? Yes, if you're going to be in exile, be one in Paris. That was our honeymoon. Paris. Jenny found a tiny flat in the Latin Quarter. Heavenly months. But the word was out. From the German police to the Paris police. It seems the police developed an internationalist consciousness long before the workers. So I was expelled from Paris too. We went to Belgium, expelled again. We came to London, where refugees come from all over the world. Well, the English are admirable in their tolerance, insufferable in their boasting about it. Oh, excuse me. The doctors told me the cough would go away in a few weeks. That was in 1858. But I was telling you about, pardon me, about Piper. You see, in London, the political refugees from all over the world used to march in and out of our flat. And Piper was one of them. He buzzed around me like a hornet. He was a flatterer, a sycophant. He would station himself 6 inches in front of me so that I could not evade him. And then he would quote my writings to me. I would say, Piper, please don't quote me to myself. Well, he had the audacity to say, thinking it would please me, that he would translate Das Kapital into English. Oh, the man couldn't speak one sentence of English without destroying it. Oh, God, and English is such a beautiful language. It's Shakespeare's language. If Shakespeare had heard Piper speak one sentence in English, he would have taken poison. But Jenny felt sorry for him. Well, she liked to invite him to our family dinners, and one evening Piper came and announced the formation of the Marxist Society of London. The Marxist Society, I asked, what is that? Well, we meet each week and discuss another of your writings. We read aloud, examine sentence by sentence. That's why we call ourselves Marxists. And we believe completely and wholeheartedly in everything you have written. Completely and wholeheartedly, I asked. Yes, he said. And we would be honored, Herr Dr. Marx. He was always calling me Herr Dr. Marx. If you would address the next meeting of the Marxist Society. I don't think I can do that. Why, he asked. Because I am not a Marxist. Oh, heavens, I didn't mind his bad English. Mine wasn't that perfect. It was his way of thinking. He was an embarrassment. A satellite encircling my words and reflecting them to the world, but distorting them, and then defending his distortions like a fanatic, denouncing anyone who would interpret them differently. I once said to Jenny, you know what I fear the most? And she said, what, that the workers' revolution will never happen? And I said, no, that the revolution will come. It'll be taken over by men like Piper, flatterers when not in power, bullies and braggarts when holding power, dogmatists. They will speak for the proletariat. They will interpret my words to the world. And they will create a new priesthood, a new hierarchy, with excommunications and indexes, inquisitions and firing squads. All this in the name of communism. Delaying for 100 years the communism of freedom. Separating the world in between capitalist empires and Communist empires. They will muck up our beautiful dream. And it'll take another revolution, maybe 2 or 3, and clean it up. That's what I was afraid of. No, I wasn't going to have Piper translate Das Kapital into English. It represented 15 years of work and the conditions of Soho. Walking every morning past beggars sleeping amidst the sewage, making my way to the British Museum and its magnificent library, working there until dusk, reading. Is there anything more dull than reading political economy? Yes, writing political economy. Then home through the darkening streets, listening to the vendors calling out the prices of their wares. Veterans of the Crimean War, some blind, others without legs, begging for pennies in the foul air. Yes. The poor smell of London. Well, my critics, trying to minimize what had gone into Das Kapital, would say, as they always say about radical writers, oh, he must have had a dreadful personal experience. Well, yes, if you want to make much of it. That walk home through Soho is what fueled the anger that went into Das Kapital. Well, I hear you saying, well, of course that's how it was then, a century ago. Only then, eh? On my way here today, I walked through the streets of your city, surrounded by garbage, breathing in foul air, past the bodies of men and women sleeping in the street, huddled together against the cold. But instead of a lassie singing an Irish ballad, I heard a voice in my ear. Some change, Mac, for a cup of coffee. You call this progress? Because you have automobiles, telephones, flying machines, and 1,000 potions to make you smell better. And people sleeping on the street. An official report. The United States gross national product, yes, gross, last year was $7,000 billion. Most impressive. But tell me, where is it? Who is profiting by it? Who is not? Less than 500 individuals control $2,000 billion in business assets. Tell me, are these people more noble, more hard-working, more valuable to society than the mother in a tenement nurturing 3 children in the cold with no money to pay the heating bill? Did I not say 150 years ago? That capitalism would create a huge amount of wealth, but this wealth would be confined to fewer and fewer hands. One more little report. I'm sure you'll get a kick out of this. Giant merger of Chemical Bank and Chase Manhattan Bank. 12,000 workers will lose jobs. Stocks rise. And they say my ideas are dead, eh? Do you know Oliver Goldsmith's poem, The Deserted Village? Ill fares the land to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Yes, decay. That's what I saw this morning, walking through your city. Houses decaying, schools decaying, human beings decaying. I was suddenly surrounded, after a bit, by men of obvious wealth, women in jewels and furs. But suddenly I heard the sound of a siren. Was violence being done somewhere nearby? Was a crime being committed? Was someone trying to take part of the gross national product illegally from those who had stolen it legally? Ah, the wonders of the market system. Human beings reduced to commodities. Their lives controlled by the master commodity, money. Oh, committee doesn't like that. In that little flat in Soho, Jenny would make hot soup and boiled potatoes, and we'd have some fresh bread from our friend the baker down the street, and we'd sit around the table and eat and discuss the events of the day, the Irish struggle for freedom, oh, the latest war, the stupidity of our country's leaders, and a political opposition confining itself to pips and squawks, and a cowardly press. I suppose things are different now these days, eh? Yes, I noticed. Also, after dinner, we clear the table, and I'm going to work. But first, with my cigars close at hand and my glass of beer. Yes, I'd work until 3 or 4 in the morning, and my books would be piled up on one side of the table. The parliamentary reports would be piled up on the other, and Jenny would be at the other end of the table transcribing. You see, my handwriting was terrible. And she would rewrite every word of mine. Can you imagine a more heroic act? Well, occasionally there'd be a crisis. No, not a world crisis. A book would be missing. And one day I couldn't find my Ricardo. And I asked Jenny, where is my Ricardo? And she said, the principles of political economy? Well, she thought I had finished with it and took it to the pawn shop. And I lost my temper. My Ricardo! You pawned my Ricardo! And she said, oh, be quiet. Last week, didn't we pawn the ring my mother gave me? Pardon me. Well, that's how it was. We pawned everything. Especially those gifts from Jenny's family. When we ran out of those gifts, we pawned our clothes. One winter, do you know London winters? I did without my overcoat. Another time I walked out of the house and my feet began to freeze on the snow. I suddenly realized I wasn't wearing any shoes. We had pawned them the day before. When Das Kapital was published, we celebrated. But Engels had to give us money so we could go to the pawn shop and retrieve our linens and dishes for the dinner. Engels was a saint. There's no other word for it. When they cut off our water and our gas and the house was dark, our spirits rather low, Engels paid the bills. When his father owned factories in Manchester, yes, capitalism saved us. But he didn't always understand our needs. We had no money for groceries, but he kept sending crates of wine. And one Christmas, when we had no means to buy a Weihnachtsbaum, a Christmas tree, Engels arrived with 6 bottles of champagne. So we imagined a tree, formed a circle around it, drank champagne, and sang Christmas songs. Oh, Tannenbaum. Well, I knew what my revolutionary friends were thinking. Marx the atheist with a Christmas tree. Yes, I did describe religion as the opium of the people. But no one has ever paid attention to the full passage. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. True opium isn't the solution, but it might be necessary to relieve pain. And don't I know that from my boils? And doesn't the world have a terrible case of boils? I keep thinking about Jenny. How she packed all our possessions and brought our 2 girls, Jennikin and Laura, across the channel to London. And gave birth 3 times in our miserably cold flat. Nursed those babies and tried to keep them warm. And watched them die one by one. Guido. He hadn't even begun to walk yet. And Francesca, a year old. I had borrowed £3 to pay for her coffee. As for Moosh, he lived for 8 years. But there was something wrong from the start. He had a very large, handsome head, but the rest of it never grew. And the night he died, we lay down on the floor around his body, slept until the morning came. So when Eleanor was born, we were fearful, but she was a tough little thing. And it was good she had 2 older sisters, and they had barely survived themselves. Jennikin was born in Paris. Now, Paris is marvelous for lovers, but not for children. Something about the air. And Laura, she was 1 year old. She was born in Brussels. No one should be born in Brussels. Now, in London, we had no money, but we always had our Sunday picnics, and we'd walk an hour and a half into the countryside, Jenny and I and the girls in Lincoln. I'll tell you about her. Lincoln would make a roast veal, and we would have tea, fruit bread, cheese, and beer. Eleanor was the youngest, but she did drink beer. Now, we had no money, but children need a vacation. So once I took the rent money and sent them to the Atlantic coast of France. Another time I took our grocery money and bought a piano because the girls loved music. Now, a father's not supposed to show favorites among his children, but Eleanor, I say to Jenny, Eleanor's a very strange child. Jenny would reply, you expect the children of Karl Marx to be normal? Well, Eleanor was the youngest, the brightest. Can you imagine a revolutionary at 8 years old? That's how old she was in 1863. Well, at the time, Poland was in rebellion against Russian rule. So, Tussi wrote a letter, well, that's what we called her, Tussi, wrote a letter to Engels about those brave little fellows in Poland, as she called them. At the age of 9, she wrote a letter to America, advice to President Lincoln, telling him how he could win the war against the Confederacy. Also, she smoked and drank wine. She was a child. She would dress her dolls while sipping from a glass of wine. She played chess with me until she was 10, and I was always hard-pressed to defeat her. But at 15, she suddenly became furious against the law about observing the Lord's Day. You see, no activity could happen on Sunday. So she organized Sunday evenings for the people of St. Martin's Hall, brought in musicians to play Handel, Mozart, Beethoven. Well, the hall was packed, 2,000 people. But it was illegal. Yet no one was arrested. There's a lesson in that. If you're going to break the law, break it with 2,000 people. And Mozart. When I used to read Shakespeare and Aeschylus, Dante, aloud to her and the sisters what she loved, and her room was a Shakespeare museum. And she memorized Romeo and Juliet and insisted that I repeat again and again those lines of Romeo when he sees Juliet for the first time. The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars as daylight doth a lamp. Her eyes in heaven would through the airy region stream so bright that birds would sing and think it were not night. Truth be told, Tussi was not easy to live with. Oh, no. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a child who finds flaws in your presentation? She would argue with me about my writings. For instance, my essay on the Jewish question. Why do you single out the Jews as representatives of capitalism? They're not the only ones who are poisoned by industry and greed. Well, I tried to make her understand. I said, I'm not singling out the Jews, I'm just using them as a vivid example. And her answer to me was to start wearing the Jewish star. I am a Jew, she announced. Well, what could I say? I shrugged my shoulders and Eleanor said, that is a very Jewish gesture. She could be very annoying. Well, Tussi knew my father had converted to Christianity. Well, you see, it wasn't very practical to be a Jew in Germany. Well, is it ever practical to be a Jew anywhere? And he had me baptized at the age of 8. And this fact intrigued Eleanor. She asked more, that's what the family called me, more because of my dark complexion. I know you were baptized, but first you were circumcised, weren't you? Well, nothing embarrassed this girl. Excuse me. Well, at such times, she was impossible. Listen to this. Alongside her Jewish star, she would wear her crucifix. No, she wasn't enamored of Christianity. She was, but she was the Irish and their rebellion against England. Now, she learned about the Irish struggle from Lizzie Burns. That was Engels' love. Lizzie was a mill girl and she couldn't read. Engels spoke 9 languages. Now, you might think it would make it difficult for them to communicate. But they loved one another. Now, Lizzie was active in the Irish struggle, and Tootsie would visit. And they would sit on the floor, drink wine together, sing Irish songs until they fell asleep. And then there was that terrible night. The night the English government hanged 2 young Irishmen right there in Soho before a cheering, drunken crowd. The genteel English in their afternoon tea and their public hangings. But I understand you don't hang people anymore, only gas them or inject poison into the veins or use electricity, burn them to death. Much more civilized. Yes, they hanged 2 young Irishmen for wanting freedom from England. Eleanor wept and wept. I told her, Tootsie, you don't have to get involved so soon in the horrors of the world. You're 15. And she said, yes, Moore. That's the point. I'm not 13. I'm not 14. I'm 15. Yes. She was 15. And she came infatuated with every dashing young man who visited our flat. I could draw up a list. For all the rest of her life, Eleanor was clever in politics, but idiotic in love. She was mad about the hero of the Paris Commune, Lisa Jolet. Well, at least he was a Frenchman. Jennikin's fellow was English. Englishmen are like English food. Need I say more? And there was Laura's lover, Lafargue. His public displays of ardor were absurd. He would walk down the street with his hand on her ass, in public, as if it were the most natural thing on earth. And Jenny defended him. It's his Creole background, she said. You know, his family came to France from Cuba. As if everyone in Cuba went around with their hands on somebody's ass. Well, Jenny was always trying to calm me down. She may calm me. Excuse me. But she was unsuccessful with my boils. Did you ever have boils? There is no illness more odious. And they plagued me my whole life. And led to stupid attempts to analyze me via my boils. Oh, Marx is angry with the capitalist system because he has boils. What imbeciles. I mean, how do they account for all those revolutionaries that don't have boils? But of course, they always find something. You know, that one was beaten by his father, and that one was nursed by his mother until he was 10. And this one over here had no toilet training. As if one must be abnormal to resent exploitation. Every explanation except the obvious one. The capitalism, by its nature, its attack on the human spirit, breeds rebellion. Simple, isn't it? Ah, yes, they say capitalism has become more humane since my time. Oh, really, has it? Just a few years ago, and this was in your newspaper, factory owners locked the doors on the women working in their chicken factory in North Carolina. Now, why did they do that? To make more profit. Well, there was a fire. and 25 workers were trapped, burned to death. You know, perhaps my anger did inflame my boils, but try working. Try sitting and writing with boils on your ass. And don't tell me about doctors. They knew less than I did, much less, because the boils were mine. I couldn't sleep. And then I found something miraculous. Water. Yes, as simple as that. Cloths soaked in warm water. Jenny would apply them patiently hour after hour. She'd wake up in the middle of the night when I cried out, apply those warm, soothing cloths. When Jenny was away, Lincoln would do that. Yes, Lincoln. Here we are, living in poverty in Soho, and Jenny's mother decides to send us Lincoln to help with the babies. Well, that's what happens when you marry into aristocracy. Your in-laws don't send you money, which you need desperately, but they send you a servant. Which is not a bad idea. The servant can take the linens and the silverware to the pawn shop and get some money for them. Lincoln did that many times. But she was never a servant. I mean, the children adored her. And Jenny had tremendous affection for her. When Jenny got sick, Lincoln was right there, attending to every need. But yes, her presence created a great tension between Jenny and me. I remember a scene. Jenny said, I saw you looking at Lincoln this morning. Looking, I said. What do you mean? You were looking at her like a man looks at a woman. I still don't know what you mean. It was one of those questions that, one of those conversations that could not possibly come to any good. Well, all this was taking place in our little flat on Dean Street, and outside was London. Can you imagine the streets of London in 1858? The Coster girls trying to sell a few rolls for a few pennies, the organ grinder with his monkey, the prostitutes, the magicians, the fire eaters, the street vendors, the bellowing of trumpets and the ringing of bells, the hurdy-gurdies, the organs, the trumpets, the fiddlers, the Scottish pipers, and always a beggar girl singing an Irish ballad. That's what I heard and saw. Walking home from the British Museum under the lamplight that had just been lit until I got to Dean Street and made my way through the mud and the sewage, thinking about how much care was taken in paving the roads of the wealthier districts. Well, I suppose it was only fitting for the author of Das Kapital to have to slog through shit while writing his denunciation of the capitalist system. Jenny didn't sympathize with my complaints about having to wade through the mud and the sewage on the street. She said, that's how it feels when I read Das Kapital. Yeah, she was my severest critic. Unsparing. Honest, you might say. Is there anything more outrageous than an honest critic? Well, the book troubled her. Yes, Das Kapital. She worried that I'd bore people from the start with my discussion of commodities, use value, exchange value. She said the book was too long, too detailed. She used the term ponderous. Can you imagine? Well, she reminded me what what our trade union friend Peter Fox said when I gave him the book. I feel like a man who's just been given an elephant as a gift. Well, Jenny said, it is an elephant. But I tried to tell her, it isn't the Communist Manifesto, which was intended for the general public. It's an analysis. And she said, well, let it be an analysis, but let it cry out like the manifesto. A specter is haunting Europe. The specter of communism. Yes, she said, that excites the reader. The specter is haunting Europe. And then she read me the first few words, lines in Das Kapital, just to annoy me, I'm sure. The wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities. She said that would put your readers to sleep. I ask you, was that boring? Well, maybe it was a little boring. I admitted that to Jenny. And you know what she said? There's no such thing as a little boring. Well, don't misunderstand. She did see Das Kapital as a profound analysis. It showed how the capitalist system must, at a certain stage in history, come into being and bring about a colossal growth of the productive forces, an unprecedented increase in the wealth of the world, and then how it must, by its own nature, distribute that wealth in such a way as to destroy the humanity of both laborer and capitalists, and how it must, by its nature, create its own grave diggers and give way to a more human system. Yes, well, Jenny would always say to me, now, are we reaching the people we want to reach? One day she said, do you know why the censors have allowed this to be published? They don't understand it and they assume no one else will. I reminded her that Das Kapital was receiving very favorable reviews, and she reminded me that those reviews were being written by Engels. Well, I told her that perhaps she was being critical of my work because she wasn't happy with me. Oh, you men, she said. You cannot believe that your work deserves criticism, and you always attribute it to something personal. Yes, more. My personal feelings are in there. But this is separate. Yes, her personal feelings. Jenny was having a terrible time. I suppose I was responsible. But I didn't know how to ease her anguish. You have to understand, when Jenny and I fell in love, I was 17, she was 19. Oh, she looked marvelous. Auburn hair, dark eyes. Well, for some reason, her family took a liking to me. They were aristocrats. Aristocrats are always impressed with intellectuals. Jenny's father and I would have long discussions about Greek philosophy. Well, I had done my doctoral thesis on Democritus and Heraclitus. I was beginning to realize that up to now, philosophers had only interpreted the world, and the point was to change it. So when I was expelled from Germany, and Jenny followed me to Paris, and we were wed. She gave birth to Jennikin and Laura. that we were happy in Paris, living on nothing, meeting our friends in cafes, they too living on nothing. What a bunch we were. Bakunin, the huge, shaggy anarchists. Engels, the handsome atheist. Heine, the saintly poet. Oh, and Steiner, the total misfit. And then there was Proudhon, who said property is theft, but wanted some. Now, being poor in Paris is one thing, and being poor in London is another. We moved there with 2 children, and soon Jenny was pregnant again, and sometimes I think she blamed me for having to raise our children in a damp, cold flat where everyone was sick all of the time. Jenny came down with smallpox, but she recovered. But it left pockmarks on her face. I tried to tell her she was still beautiful, but it didn't help. I wish you could know Jenny. What she did for me cannot be calculated. And she accepted the fact that I could not, like other men, apply for a job. Well, I did once. I applied for the railway for a position as a clerk. Let me read you their response. Dr. Marx, we are honored with your request for a position here. We have never had a doctor of philosophy working for us as a clerk. But the position requires illegible handwriting, so we must regretfully decline your offer. But Jenny believed in my ideas. But she became impatient with what she considered the pretensions of high-level scholarship. Come down to earth here, doctor, she would say. Yes. Well, she wanted me to describe the theory of surplus value so ordinary workers could understand it. I told her no one can understand it without first understanding the labor theory value and how labor power is a special commodity whose value is determined by the cost of the means of subsistence and yet gives value to all other commodities. A value which always exceeds the value of labor power. She would shake her head. No, not good enough. All you have to say is this. Your employer pays you the barest amount of wages, just enough to survive and work. But out of your labor, he makes far more than what he pays you, and therefore he gets richer and richer, and you stay poor. All right, let us say that only 100 people in world history have ever understood my theory of surplus value, but it is still true. Not long ago, I was reading the reports of the United States Department of Labor, and there you have it. Your workers are making more and more products and getting less and less in salary. And what is the result? Just as I had predicted. Now the richest 1% of the American population owns 40% of the nation's wealth. And this in the great model of world capitalism. The nation that not only robbed its own people, but sucked in the wealth of the rest of the world. But Jenny was always trying to simplify ideas that were by their nature complex. She accused me of being a scholar first and a revolutionary second. She said, forget your intellectual readers, address the workers. She called me arrogant and intolerant. Why do you attack other revolutionaries more vehemently then you attack the bourgeoisie. But Proudhon, for instance, the man did not understand that we must applaud capitalism for their development of giant industries and then take it over. Proudhon thought that we must retreat into a simpler society. And he wrote a book, The Philosophy of Poverty, and I replied with my own book, Poverty of Philosophy, which I thought was rather clever, but Jenny thought was insulting. But I suppose Jenny was a far better human being than I could ever be. She encouraged me to get off me behind and involve myself in the cause of the London workers. And she came with me when I was invited to address the first meeting of the Internationalist Working Men's Association. I believe that was in the fall of 1864. 2,000 people were packed into St. Martin's Hall. The workers of all countries must unite against foreign policies which are criminal, which play upon national prejudices, which squander in wars the people's blood and treasure. We must combine across national boundaries to vindicate the simple laws of morals and justice in international affairs. Workers of the world, unite! Jenny liked that. She kept the pamphlet going, and the water cut off and the gas cut off, but she never tired of the subject of female emancipation. She said that the vitality of women was being sapped by them staying at home, darning socks and cooking. So she refused to stay at home. She accused me of being theoretically an emancipationist, but practically ignorant on the problems of women. You and Engels, she said, you write about sexual equality, but you do not participate. Well, I refuse to comment on that. Now, she supported with all her heart the Irish struggle against England. Queen Victoria had said, "These Irish are really abominable people, not like any other civilized nation." So Jenny wrote a letter to the London newspapers. England hangs Irish rebels who wanted freedom from England. Is England a civilized nation? Jenny and I were powerfully in love. I don't know how to make you understand that, but we had gone through hellish times in London. The love was still there, but at a certain point something happened. I don't know what it was. Jenny said it was because she was no longer the great beauty I had wooed, and that made me angry. Then she said it was because of Lincoln, and that made me even more angry. Then she said I was angry because it was true, and that made me furious. Yes, yes. They claim that since the collapse of the USSR, communism is dead. Do these idiots know what communism is? Do they think a system run by a thug and who kills his fellow revolutionaries is communism? Schusskeiten. That's German. I won't explain. Journalists, politicians who say such things, what kind of an education have they had? Did they ever read the manifesto? What did I do with it? There it is. That Engels and I wrote when he was 28 years old and I was 30. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association. Remember that word. In which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Do they understand? Do they understand the object of communism? Freedom of the individual to develop himself or herself as a compassionate human being. Do they think that someone who calls himself a communist or a socialist and acts like a gangster understands what communism is? To shoot those who disagree with you, is that the communism I spent my life for? That monster in Russia who took all power for himself and insisted on interpreting my ideas like a religious fanatic when he was putting his old comrades against the wall before firing squads. Did he allow his citizens to read the letter that I wrote to the New York Tribune in which I said, capital punishment cannot be justified in any nation who calls himself civilized? Here in America, your prisons are crowded. So who is in them, eh? The poor. Now some of them have committed violent and terrible crimes, but most of them are just ordinary robbers, thieves, sellers of drugs. They believe in the free enterprise system. They do what capitalists do, but on a much smaller scale. Do you know what Engels and I wrote about prisons? Let me see. Here we go. Well, yes. Rather than punishing individuals for their crimes, we should destroy the social conditions which engender crime and give to each individual the scope which he needs in society in order to develop his life. Oh yes. We spoke of a dictatorship of the proletariat, not a dictatorship of the party, of a central committee, not a dictatorship of one man. No. We spoke of a temporary dictatorship of the working class, where the masses take over the state and govern in the interests of all, until after a while the state no longer becomes necessary and gradually disappears. Bakunin, of course, disagreed with me. He said that a state, even a worker state, if it has an army, police, or prisons, will become a tyranny. Well, he loved to argue with me. Do you know who he is? Bakunin? The anarchist? Well, if a novelist ever wrote into a book this character, you would say to yourself, there's no such person that could possibly exist. And to say that Bakunin and I did not get along would be a great understatement. Here's what he said when Engels and I were in Brussels writing the manifesto. Marx and Engels, especially Marx, are ingrained bourgeois. We were ingrained bourgeois. Well, of course, compared to Bakunin, everyone was bourgeois. Because Bakunin chose to live like a pig. And if you didn't live like a pig, if you had a roof over your head, if you had a piano in your sitting room and you enjoyed a little fresh bread and wine, you were bourgeoisie. Now I grant a man courage. Well, he was imprisoned in Siberia, but he escaped and he wandered the world trying to foment revolution everywhere. He wanted an anarchist society. But the only anarchism he ever succeeded in establishing was in his head. Now, he tried to start a rebellion in Bologna, almost killed himself with his own revolver. His revolutions failed everywhere, but he was like a man whose failures with women just spurred him on to more. Did you ever see a photograph of Bakunin? He's a giant of a man with a bald head which he covered with a little gray cap and a massive beard and ferocious expression. He had no teeth. Well, scurvy as a result of his prison diet. Now, he seemed to live not in this world, though, but in the world of his own imagination. He was oblivious to money. If he had it, he gave it away. If he didn't, he borrowed without any thought of returning it. And he didn't have any home. But you could say that the world was his home. He would appear at a comrade's house and said, "I am here. Where do I sleep? What is there to eat?" And within an hour, he was more at home than his hosts. There was that time in Soho. We were eating dinner. And Bakunin burst in. Well, didn't even bother to knock. But it was his habit to appear at dinner time. Well, we were surprised. We thought he was in Italy. I mean, every time we had heard about him, he was in some far-off land organizing a revolution. Well, he almost knocked the door off its hinges. He came in, looked around, smiled his toothless smile. "Good evening, comrades." And without waiting for a response, he sat down at the table and started devouring sausage and meat in enormous chunks and cheese, stuffing it into his mouth, and glass after glass of brandy. I said, "Mikhail, please, have some wine. We have plenty of that. Brandy is expensive." So he drank some wine, spit it right out, absolutely no taste. Then he began his usual performance. Preaching, arguing, ordering, shouting, exhorting. I was furious, but Jenny was the first one to speak up. She said, "Mikhail, please, you're consuming the oxygen in the room." And all he did was roar with laughter and went on. Bakunin's head was full of anarchist garbage, romantic, utopian nonsense. I wanted to expel him from the Internationale, but Jenny said that was ridiculous. Why, she asked, do revolutionary groups with 6 members always threaten someone with expulsion? Well, he had 100 disguises. Of course, the police were looking for him in every country in Europe. And when he came to us in London, he was disguised as a priest. Well, he thought he was. He looked ridiculous. Well, he was with us a week. And once we stayed up the whole night arguing and drinking and arguing until neither of us could walk. In fact, I went to sleep in the midst of one of his perorations, but he shook me and woke me up and said, "I have not finished my point." It was that glorious time in the winter of 1871, excuse me, when the Commune had taken power in Paris. Yes, Paris Commune. Bakunin leaped with his whole bulk into that revolution. Well, the French understood him. They had a saying, On the first day of a revolution, Bakunin is a treasure. On the second day, he should be shot. Do you know that about that magnificent episode in human history? Paris Commune? But I'm sorry to say the story starts with stupidity. I am speaking about Napoleon III. Yes, the nephew of Bonaparte. He was a buffoon, a stage actor, and he smiled into the crowd as 16 million French peasants lived in blind, dark hovels and their children were dying of starvation. Of course, he kept a legislature. And because people voted, it was thought they had democracy. A common mistake. Now Bonaparte wanted glory, so he made the mistake of attacking Bismarck's armies. Well, he was quickly defeated. Whereupon, the victorious German army marched into Paris and were greeted by something more devastating than guns. Silence. They saw that the statues of Paris were draped in black. It was immense, invisible, silent resistance. Well, they did the wise thing. They paraded through the Arc de Triomphe and quickly departed. And the old French order, the Republic, liberals they called themselves, they didn't dare come back into Paris. They were trembling with fear because with the Germans gone, Paris had been taken over by the workers, the housewives, the clerks, the intellectuals, the armed citizens. The people of Paris formed not a government, but something more glorious, something governments everywhere fear: a commune, the collective energy of the people, the commune de Paris. People meeting 24 hours a day all over the city, blocks of 3 and 4, making decisions together, while the city was encircled by the French army threatening to invade. Paris became the first free city of the world, the first enclave of liberty in a world of tyranny. I said to Bakunin, you want to know what I mean by a dictatorship of the proletariat? Look at the Commune of Paris. That is democracy. Not the democracy of England or America, where elections are circuses. And isn't that true? Where voters vote for one or another guardian of the old order, where whatever candidate wins, the rich go on ruling the country. The Commune of Paris, it lived only a few months, but it was the first legislative body to represent the poor. Its laws were for that. It abolished their debts, postponed their rents, forced the pawn shops to return their most needed possessions. They refused to take salaries higher than the workers. They shortened the hours of bakers and worked on a plan to make it free admission to theaters for everyone. The great Courbet himself, whose paintings had stunned Europe, presided over the Federation of Artists. They reopened the museums, set up commissions for the education of women, something unheard of, the education of women, and took advantage of the latest in science, the lighter-than-air balloon, which they launched one out of Paris to drop printed papers to peasants with a simple, powerful message. The message that should be dropped to every working person on earth. Our interests are the same. The Commune declared the purpose of schools to teach children to love and respect each other. Now I have read your many discussions of education. Such nonsense. They teach everything needed to succeed in the capitalist world, but do they teach the young to struggle for justice? The communards understood the meaning of that. They educated not only by their words, but by their deeds. They destroyed the guillotine, the instrument of tyranny, even of revolutionary tyranny. Yes, that was the Commune of Paris. The streets were always full, discussions going on everywhere, kindness ruled. The streets were safe, with hardly any police at all. Yes, that was socialism. That was socialism. Of course, that example, the example of the Commune, could not be allowed. And so the armies of the Republic marched into Paris and began to slaughter. They took the leaders of the Commune to Père Lachaise cemetery and put them up against a stone wall and shot them. Altogether, 30,000 were killed. The Commune was crushed by wolves and swine, but it was the most glorious achievement in our times. Well, Bakunin and I drank and argued and drank some more. I said to him, Mikhail, you do not understand the concept of proletarian state. We cannot shake off the past in one orgasmic moment. We will have to remake our society with remnants of the old order. That will take time. Bakunin answered, no! The people who overthrow the old order must immediately live in freedom or they will lose it. Well, it began to get personal. I lost my patience and I said, you are too stupid to understand. And the brandy was having its effect on Bakunin too. He said, Marx, you were an arrogant son of a bitch as always. You're the one who don't understand. You think the workers are going to make a revolution based on your theories. They could care a shit for your theories. Their anger will rise spontaneously, and they will make a revolution without your so-called science. He was getting excited. I spit on your theories. He was a pig. This was too much, and I said to him, Mikhail, you can spit on my theories, but not on my floor. Clean it immediately. There, he said, I knew you were a bully. And I said, yes, and I knew you were a eunuch. Well, he roared, and it sounded like some prehistoric animal. And then he leaped upon me. Oh, you have to understand the man was enormous, and we were wrestling on the floor. We were too drunk to hurt one another. And finally we just lay back, gasping for air as for rest. But then Bakunin, rising like a hippopotamus from a river, unbuttoned his trousers and began to urinate out the window. I could not believe what I was seeing. What the hell are you doing, Mikhail? I said. What does it look like I'm doing? I am pissing out your window. I said, no, no, that's disgusting. I am pissing on England. I am pissing on the whole British Empire. I said, no, you're not. You're pissing on my street. Well, he didn't reply. He buttoned his pants and just lay down. Soon was snoring, and I lay down as well and was soon unconscious. Jenny found us there together early in the morning when she woke up at dawn. Now they could not allow the commune to live. The commune was dangerous. It was too wonderful and inspiring an example for the rest of the world. So they drowned it in blood. Well, it still happens, doesn't it? I'm sure it does. That whenever, in some corner of the world, the old order is pushed aside, people begin to experiment with a new way of living, people innocent of any ideology, just angry with their lives. Cannot be permitted. And so they go to work to destroy it, and you know who they are. Sometimes insidiously, covertly, sometimes directly, violently. So they keep saying capitalism has triumphed. Triumphed. When 1/4 of American children are born in poverty, 40,000 of them die each year before their first birthday. Yes, capitalism has triumphed. Over whom? You have technological marvels. You have sent men into the stratosphere. But what are the people left on earth? Why are they so fearful? Why are you so fearful? Why do they turn to drugs and alcohol? Why do they go berserk and kill? And it's right here in your newspapers. Your politicians are bloated with pride. The world will now move towards the free enterprise system, they say. What, has everyone gone stupid? Don't they know the history of the free enterprise system? When government did everything not for the people, but for the rich. When your government gave 100 million acres free to the railroads and turned their backs on the Chinese immigrants and the Irish immigrants who worked on those railroads for 12 hours a day and died in the heat and the cold. And when they protested and went on strike, the government sent in armies to crush them into submission. Why the hell did I write Das Kapital? If not because I saw the misery, the capitalism and the free enterprise system. In England, little girls were put to work in the textile mills because their little fingers could operate the spindles. In America, young girls were put to work in the mills of Massachusetts at the age of 10 and died at the age of 25. Your cities were cesspools of vice and poverty. That is capitalism then and capitalism now. Yes, yes. I see the luxuries advertised in your magazines and on your screen. So many screens, so many pictures. You see so much, but you know so little. Doesn't anyone read history anymore? What kind of crap are they teaching in the schools? Oh, they're so sensitive. I miss Jenny. She'd have something to say about all this. I watched her die, you know. Sick and miserable at the end. But surely if she remembered our moments of pleasure, ecstasy, in Paris or even in Soho. I miss my daughters. Ah, anniversary of the Gulf War. A victory short and sweet. I know about these victories short and sweet. With a field strewn with 1,000 bodies. Children dying for want of food and medicine. Europe and Africa, Palestine. People killing one another over boundaries. Did you ever not read what I wrote 150 years ago? Get rid of these national boundaries. No more visas, no more quotas, no more flags to some, I don't know, some national figure. No more immigration quotas. Workers of the world, unite. Now I confess I did not reckon on capitalism surviving. I didn't imagine that there was enough drugs to keep the sick system alive. War to keep industries going and people crazed with patriotism so they would forget their misery. Religious fanatics promising the masses that Jesus would return. I know Jesus. He's not coming back. I was wrong in 1848, thinking capitalism was on its way out. Oh, my timing was off by a little bit, perhaps by 200 years. But it will be transformed. It will be. It's happening now. All the systems of the world will be transformed. People are not fools. I remember what your President Lincoln said, that you can't fool all of the people all of the time. Their common sense, their instinct for decency and justice will bring them together. Now don't scoff. It's happened before, it'll happen again. On a much larger scale. And when it does, the rulers of our societies will be able to do nothing to prevent it. With all their wealth, with all their armies, they won't be able to control it. Your servants will not serve anymore. And your armies will disobey orders. Yes, capitalism has accomplished wonders unsurpassed in history, miracles of technology and science, but it's preparing its own death. Its voracious appetite for profit. More, more, more. And this only creates a world of turmoil. It turns everything, art, literature, music, beauty itself, into commodities to be bought and to be sold. It turns human beings into commodities. And not just the factory worker, the physician, the scientist, the artist, the poet, the actor. All must sell themselves to survive. And what will happen when all these people realize that they are all workers and they all have the same enemy? They will join with others and fulfill themselves. And not just in their own countries. Because capitalism needs a world market. Its cry is, free trade. Because it needs to roam free in the globe in order to make more profit. More. But in doing so, it creates, unwittingly, a world culture. People cross borders more now than any time in history. And by doing this, what happens? Ideas cross the borders. Something new is bound to come from this. When I was in Paris with Jenny in 1843, I was only 25. And I wrote that in the new industrial system, people are estranged from their work because it is distasteful to them. They are estranged from nature because of smoke and the smells and the noise invade their senses. It's called progress. They are estranged from others because everyone is set against everyone else, struggling to survive. And they are estranged from their own selves, living lives that are not their own, living lives they don't want to live. So a good life, a good life is possible only in dreams and in fantasy. But it doesn't have to be that way. There's still a possibility of choice. Not only a possibility, I grant. Nothing is certain. That's clear to me now. I was too damn certain. Now I know. Things can change. But people have to get off their asses. I have a suggestion. Pretend you got boils. Pretend you have boils. Pretend that sitting on your ass gives you enormous pain, so you have to stand up, you have to move, you have to act. It is our world. It's time we start taking advantage of it. Now let's not speak anymore about capitalism or socialism. Let's just speak of using the incredible wealth of the world for human beings. Give people what they need. Food, medicine, clean air, pure water, trees and grass, pleasant homes to live in, some hours of work, more hours of leisure. And for God's sake, don't ask who deserves it. Every human being deserves it. Well, it's time for me to go. Do you resent me coming back and irritating you? Look at it this way. It's the second coming. Christ couldn't make it, so Marx did. God's sake. Happy luck. How are you, though? How are you, though? How are you, though? How are you, though? How are you, though?